My parents left me at a train station as a joke. Let's see how she finds her way home, they laughed. I never went back. 20 years later, they tracked me down, and this morning, I woke up to 29 missed calls. Imagine being a terrified 12-year-old, watching your own parents drive away from you, their laughter echoing as they left you completely alone in the bustling chaos of a strange city. That searing memory, that profound betrayal, haunted me for 2 decades, a constant shadow. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the moment their past sins slammed back into my present, threatening to shatter the fragile peace I'd painstakingly built. It was just this morning. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree, 29 missed calls. From an unknown number. Immediately, my stomach dropped, and I was right back there, a child abandoned at Union Station, watching their car disappear, hearing my mother's cruel shout, "Let's see how she finds her way home." That day, that moment, changed everything. Through years of therapy, of raw, difficult work, I built a new life, far from the people who discarded me. I swore I'd never go back. But now, after all these years, they had found me. Before I dive into how they abandoned me and how I fought to rebuild my world, let me take you back. Growing up in Ridgeview, Pennsylvania, was like living in 2 completely different realities. To anyone on the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family, Frank and Karen Taylor, successful small business owners, with their 2 children, Ethan and Jennifer. That's me, now Megan. But step behind our front door, and our home was an unpredictable, emotional minefield. My father, Frank, owned the biggest hardware store in town. He was the man, well-respected, known for his booming laugh and generous donations. My mother, Karen, ran a small bakery, famous for her apple pies that won the county fair blue ribbon 3 years straight. To the world, they were the ideal couple. But the Frank and Karen I knew? They were entirely different creatures. Dad's friendly demeanor would just vanish the second he walked through our door. His drinking usually started around dinner, escalating as the evening wore on. A bad day at the store meant walking on eggshells at home, praying you wouldn't be the one to trigger his temper. And Mom? Instead of protecting us, she became his most loyal enabler, always making excuses. Your father works so hard for this family. Or he just needs to blow off some steam. Their parenting philosophy was what they called tough love, but let me tell you, it was just cruelty dressed up as discipline. It included what they considered teaching moments, but most people would recognize them as emotional abuse. I remember when I was 7, they left me at a grocery store for over an hour just because I'd asked for candy. "Maybe now you'll learn not to be so greedy," Mom had said when they finally came back, finding me sobbing by the customer service desk. The store manager had actually been on the verge of calling the police. My older brother, Ethan, years my senior, got a different kind of treatment. He was the golden child, could do no wrong. Star quarterback, straight-A student, Dad's fishing buddy. While I'd get criticized for a 97% on a math test, what happened to the other 3%? Ethan would be praised for a B+. I was the family scapegoat. If anything went wrong, it was somehow my fault. Dinner was cold? Must have distracted Mom while she was cooking. Dad had a bad day at work? Probably because he was up late helping me with homework. The psychological burden was crushing for a child. My 11th birthday stands out like a raw wound. Mom had promised a small party with a few friends. I'd been buzzing with excitement all week, even helping her bake cupcakes the night before. But on the morning of my birthday, they told me we were going to the local amusement park instead. I was disappointed, but I tried my best not to show it. They drove for nearly an hour, pulled into the parking lot, handed me $20 and said, "Have fun. We'll pick you up at 5 p.m. I spent my entire birthday alone, too scared to go on any rides, just sitting on a bench near the entrance, watching other families laugh and play together. They finally picked me up at 7 p.m., not 5 p.m., finding me terrified and in tears. "Just teaching you to be independent," Dad had laughed. "Besides, we had to pick up your cake." There was no cake at home. No presents either. When I started crying, they just called me ungrateful. These jokes and lessons happened regularly, chipping away at me. I developed coping mechanisms, staying quiet, trying to be invisible, spending every possible moment at friends' houses, and losing myself in art. Drawing became my sanctuary. On paper, I could create worlds where adults were kind and children felt safe. The day before the train station incident is still burned into my memory. I'd gotten my report card. Straight A's, except for one A- in science. For most parents, that's cause for celebration, right? For mine, it was unacceptable. An A-? Dad had bellowed, waving the report card in my face. What's wrong with you? Are you getting lazy? Ethan never got A-. I whispered. I tried really hard. Mom scoffed, clearly not hard enough. We're not raising mediocre children. That night, I overheard them in the kitchen. She needs to learn that life doesn't hand you anything, Dad said, his voice low. She's too soft, too sensitive. Maybe she needs a real lesson. Mom agreed. Something she won't forget. The next morning, they announced we were taking a family day trip to Chicago. Ethan couldn't come because of football practice. It would just be the three of us, something that rarely happened. Despite the tension from the night before, a tiny glimmer of hope flickered within me. Maybe, just maybe, this was their way of apologizing. I couldn't have been more wrong. The morning of the Chicago trip, I woke with a strange mix of apprehension and excitement. Dad seemed unusually cheerful at breakfast, making jokes and even ruffling my hair. Mom packed sandwiches for the road, humming to herself. The change in atmosphere was so dramatic, it made me uneasy rather than relieved. The drive from Ridgeview to Chicago took just over 3 hours. Dad played his classic rock. Mom quizzed me on state capitals. If I got one wrong, Dad would make a clicking sound with his tongue and say, "Even a third grader would know that one, Jen." As we neared the city, Mom turned to face me. "So, Jennifer," she said with an odd, knowing smile. "Think you're pretty smart, do you?" Despite that A-, I guess, I answered cautiously. "Book smart, maybe," Dad interjected, eyes on the road. "But street smart? That's different." "Real life doesn't grade on a curve," Mom added cryptically. The knot in my stomach tightened. I stared out the window as the Chicago skyline appeared, trying to ignore the flashing warning signals in my mind. We parked near Union Station around noon. The massive Beaux-Arts building was intimidating, swarming with travelers. I'd never been to Chicago, and the scale of it overwhelmed me. "Hungry?" Dad asked as we entered the Grand Hall. I nodded, still clinging to the hope this might turn into a normal family outing. "Good. Wait here by this pillar," Mom instructed, pointing to one of the huge columns. "We're going to move the car to a better spot and grab some food. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Can't I come with you?" I asked, that familiar anxiety creeping in. "What? Are you a baby?" Dad laughed. "It's just 15 minutes. You're 12 years old, for God's sake." "But I don't know Chicago," I protested weakly. "Exactly," Mom said, a strange emphasis in her voice. "Stay right here. Don't move." I watched them walk away, disappearing into the crowd. The station clock read 12:17 p.m. I stood awkwardly by the pillar, watching people stream past, businessmen, families, couples. 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. The anxiety that had been simmering now boiled over into full-blown panic. Had they forgotten me? Had something happened to them? At the 1-hour mark, I was fighting back tears. I didn't have a cell phone. They hadn't left me any money for a payphone. I had exactly $7 in my pocket, my weekly allowance saved for this trip. Then, through the huge windows facing the street, I saw it, our blue Ford Taurus, driving slowly past the station. My heart leaped. They had gotten lost or confused about where to meet. I ran toward the exit, waving frantically. As the car passed, I saw both my parents inside. Dad was driving slowly, and when he saw me at the window, he grinned and waved. Not a wave of recognition or relief, but a taunting, cruel gesture. Mom rolled down her window and shouted words that would forever change my life. "Let's see how you find your way home." Their laughter echoed, chilling me to the bone as they accelerated away. I stood frozen, utterly unable to process what had just happened. They left me. On purpose. In a city 3 hours from home. Alone. The initial denial gave way to crushing reality. This wasn't a 15-minute lesson. They weren't parking around the corner, waiting to jump out and say, "Surprise. Did you learn your lesson?" They were actually driving back to Pennsylvania without me. Complete, soul-crushing panic set in. I ran back inside the station, gasping for breath, tears streaming down my face. The vastness of Union Station became terrifying. Too many people, too much noise, too many exits and entrances. Where could I go? What could I do? No phone, no contacts, not enough money for a ticket home, no ID. For 2 hours, I wandered the station in a daze, occasionally breaking down in sobs before forcing myself to pull it together. I was terrified to ask for help. My parents had always warned me about stranger danger and said police would take disobedient children away to terrible places. Around 3:30 p.m., a station employee named Janet noticed me. She was an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes behind red-framed glasses. She'd seen me circling the same areas repeatedly, clearly distressed. "Honey, are you lost?" she asked, kneeling to my level. I shook my head automatically, trained to never admit trouble to strangers. "Where are your parents?" she persisted gently. They want to move the car," I lied, my voice cracking. "When was that?" Janet asked, her expression growing concerned. I couldn't maintain the facade any longer. 3 hours of abandonment, fear, and confusion came pouring out in a flood of tears. "They left me," I sobbed. "They drove away and said to find my way home. But home is in Pennsylvania." Janet's face shifted from concern to alarm. She led me to a quieter area near the administrative offices, got me a bottle of water, and asked me to explain everything. Through hiccuping sobs, I told her about my parents, the A-, and watching them drive away laughing. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked. "Jennifer Taylor," I whispered. "And how old are you, Jennifer?" Her face hardened momentarily before softening again. "I'm going to help you, Jennifer. What you're describing is not okay." "Not at all." Janet informed her supervisor, who called station security. A kind security officer named Marcus took over, asking me more questions about my parents, our address, and phone number. I could see the adults exchanging grim glances over my head. "We need to call the police," Marcus finally said. "What your parents did is abandonment. It's against the law." And that's how, at 4:45 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, I found myself sitting in a small office at Union Station, watching Officer Teresa Ramirez file a report about my abandonment. My whole body felt numb. This couldn't be real. Parents don't just leave their children in strange cities. But mine had. The fluorescent lights of the Chicago Police Department's 1st District station buzzed overhead as I sat, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, though it wasn't cold. Officer Ramirez had brought me here after taking my statement at Union Station. She'd been kind but professional, documenting everything with a seriousness that made the reality of my situation sink in deeper. "We've tried calling your home number twice," she informed me, setting down a cup of hot chocolate. "No answer yet." My stomach twisted. "Maybe they're still driving back," I suggested weakly. The drive to Ridgeview took over 3 hours. A small, desperate part of me still hoped this was just an extreme lesson, that they'd turn around halfway home once they felt I'd been scared enough. "Maybe," Officer Ramirez replied, her tone suggesting she thought otherwise. The police station was nothing like I'd imagined. No visible bars or cells, just desks, computers, and phones. Still, the knowledge that I was in a police station because my own parents had abandoned me was overwhelming. "Jennifer," a new voice called. A woman in her 40s with curly brown hair approached, carrying a file. "I'm Laura Donovan from the Department of Children and Family Services. I'd like to talk with you for a bit if that's okay." The next hour passed in a blur of gentle questions. Had my parents done anything like this before? Yes, but never this extreme. Did they ever hit me? No, not physically. Did I feel safe at home? I hesitated too long before answering, which was answer enough. "What's going to happen to me tonight?" I finally asked, my voice small. Laura explained that since they couldn't reach my parents, I would be placed in emergency foster care until the situation could be sorted out. The words foster care sent a chill through me. I'd heard stories. None of them good. "We have a wonderful emergency placement family," Laura assured me, seeming to read my thoughts. The Williams family has worked with us for years. They have a daughter about your age. By 9 p.m., I was sitting at the Williams dining table, picking at a plate of spaghetti I couldn't eat. Diane and Robert Williams tried their best to make me comfortable, but nothing felt real. Their daughter, Alicia, showed me to the guest room, awkwardly offering to lend me pajamas and a toothbrush. "Your parents will probably come get you tomorrow," she said, trying to be helpful. I nodded, not believing it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, replaying the image of my parents driving away, laughing. What kind of parents did that? What had I done to deserve it? The next morning, after a breakfast I barely touched, Laura Donovan returned. Her expression told me everything I needed to know before she spoke. "We reached your parents late last night," she said carefully. "Are they coming to get me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Not yet," Laura replied. "They said they were teaching you a lesson about independence and problem-solving." Hot tears sprang to my eyes. By leaving me in a different state? They claimed they planned to call the station after a few hours to check on you, but things escalated when authorities became involved. Translation: they hadn't planned to call anyone. They'd expected me to panic, maybe cry, and then what? Magically find my way home with no money, no phone, no ID? "Your brother Ethan confirmed you were expected home yesterday evening," Laura continued. "He was surprised when his parents returned without you." A fresh wave of betrayal washed over me. So, Ethan hadn't been in on it. Small comfort. "What happens now?" I asked. "We've arranged a meeting at our office tomorrow. Your parents will be there. A judge has been notified about the case, and there will be a hearing later this week to determine next steps." The next 36 hours passed in a strange limbo. The Williams family was kind, but I felt like a ghost moving through their home. Diane tried engaging me in conversation. Robert offered to play board games. Alicia invited me to watch TV with her. I went through the motions, numb. The meeting at the DCFS office was set for 2 p.m. Monday. I changed back into my original clothes, now wrinkled from being hastily washed and dried. Laura drove me to a government building downtown, explaining what would happen. "You don't have to speak to your parents if you don't want to," she assured me. "I'll be with you the whole time." We entered a conference room with a long table. Already seated were 2 other adults Laura introduced as her supervisor and a family court liaison. 5 minutes later, the door opened again. My parents walked in, looking nothing like the confident, laughing people who had driven away from Union Station. Dad's face was haggard. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed. Behind them came a man in a suit who introduced himself as their attorney. "Jennifer," Mom said, stepping toward me. I flinched back involuntarily. "Please take your seats," Laura's supervisor instructed firmly. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my young life. My parents, guided by their attorney, presented their version of events. They had been concerned about my lack of self-reliance and problem-solving skills. The train station exercise had been planned as a controlled life lesson. They had circled back after 20 minutes to check on me from a distance, but couldn't find me. They assumed I had figured out how to call home or get help, demonstrating exactly the resourcefulness they wanted to encourage. They had driven home expecting to find a message from me, perhaps from a police station or a helpful stranger's phone, showing I had risen to the challenge. "We were teaching her independence," Dad insisted. "Kids today are too coddled. By abandoning your 12-year-old daughter in a city 3 hours from home with no money, no phone, and no ID?" Laura's supervisor asked incredulously. "She's exaggerating how little money she had," Mom said dismissively. "And there are phones everywhere. She could have called collect." I sat in stunned silence. They weren't sorry. They truly believed they had done nothing wrong. The meeting continued with discussions of child welfare laws, potential charges, and next steps. Through it all, my parents maintained their position. This was a parenting choice, perhaps extreme, but with good intentions. When finally asked if I wanted to return home with them, I found my voice. "No," I said firmly, surprising even myself. "I don't want to go back." The shock on their faces might have been satisfying under different circumstances. "Don't be ridiculous." Dad sputtered. "Of course, you're coming home. "That's not your decision right now, Mr. Taylor," the court liaison explained. "Given the circumstances, Jennifer will remain in temporary custody while the court evaluates the situation." As the meeting concluded, Mom tried one more time to approach me. "Jennifer, honey, you're overreacting. You taught me to abandon people who trust you," I interrupted, tears streaming down my face. "That's what I learned." I was escorted from the room, my parents' protests fading behind me. In that moment, I knew I would never see our house in Ridgeview as home again. The next few weeks passed in a blur of court hearings, interviews with social workers, and therapy sessions. The initial emergency placement with the Williams family was extended while the system determined what would happen next. They were kind, but their home never felt like more than a temporary shelter, a waiting room before my real life could resume. Then, 1 month after the train station incident, I met Thomas and Sarah Miller. They arrived at the DCFS office on a Tuesday afternoon, both in their early 40s, with warm smiles that reached their eyes. Thomas taught high school art, and Sarah was a pediatric nurse. They had no biological children, but had been foster parents for over a decade. "We believe every child deserves safety, respect, and room to grow," Sarah explained during our first meeting, supervised by Grace Chin, my newly assigned social worker. "No pressure to talk about anything until you're ready," Thomas added. "We just want you to know our home is open to you for as long as you need." There was something so genuine about them that cut through my practiced emotional distance. When Grace asked if I'd be willing to try a placement with the Millers, I nodded cautiously. The Millers lived in a modest 2-story house in Evanston, just north of Chicago. My room there had pale yellow walls, a window seat overlooking a small backyard garden, and empty bookshelves waiting to be filled. "We want you to make it your own," Sarah explained, showing me around. "Pictures, posters, books, whatever makes you comfortable." "What are the rules?" I asked wearily, thinking of the ever-changing expectations at my parents' house. Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances. "Basic respect and safety," Thomas replied. "Letting us know where you are, helping with household chores, doing your best in school. We'll figure out the details together as we go." I waited for the catch, the hidden expectations, the impossible standards. They never came. The contrast between the Millers and my birth parents was disorienting. The first time I spilled a glass of juice at dinner, I froze in terror, waiting for the explosion of anger. Instead, Sarah simply handed me a cloth, saying, "No worries. Accidents happen." Trust came slowly, painfully. I kept waiting for the Millers to reveal their true selves, to drop the act of kindness and show the cruelty I'd been trained to expect from adults. But day after day, they remained consistent in their gentle support. Meanwhile, the legal process continued. My parents attended mandatory parenting classes and counseling sessions, making what Grace called minimal effort. They complained to anyone who would listen that the state had overreacted to a simple parenting choice. Dr. Reynolds, my therapist, helped me understand what had happened in clinical terms: emotional abuse, neglect, abandonment. She diagnosed me with PTSD and anxiety, introducing coping mechanisms that actually helped. For the first time, I learned that my parents' behavior wasn't normal. And more importantly, it wasn't my fault. "Nothing you could have done would have justified what they did," Dr. Reynolds emphasized repeatedly, until I began to believe it. 3 months into my stay with the Millers, Ethan came to visit. Now 16, my brother seemed smaller somehow, less the golden child and more just a teenager uncomfortable in his own skin. We sat awkwardly in the Millers' living room while Sarah busied herself in the kitchen, giving us privacy while remaining within earshot. "They miss you, Ethan," said finally, staring at his hands. "Do they?" I asked, skeptical. "In their way," he admitted. "Dad's drinking more. Mom's always cleaning, even when the house is spotless." "Are they sorry?" Ethan hesitated. "They're sorry you're gone. I don't think they understand why what they did was wrong." "And you?" I challenged. "Do you understand?" My brother looked up, his eyes meeting mine directly for perhaps the first time. "I knew they were harder on you. I should have said something, done something. I'm sorry, Jen." It wasn't enough to heal all the wounds, but it was honest. Ethan and I talked for another hour, cautiously navigating our shared past from our now different perspectives. Before leaving, he hugged me awkwardly and whispered, "I'm glad you're safe." We didn't speak again for many years. The court proceedings culminated in a hearing 6 months after the train station incident. Based on psychological evaluations, home studies, and my own testimony, the judge determined my parents had demonstrated a pattern of emotional abuse culminating in severe neglect and endangerment. My parents were given a choice: complete an intensive 2-year rehabilitation program with supervised visitation, or surrender their parental rights. To everyone's surprise but mine, they chose the latter. "We won't be vilified for trying to raise a strong, independent daughter," my father declared to the court. "If the state thinks it can do better, let it try." And just like that, with a stroke of a pen, Frank and Karen Taylor were no longer legally my parents. 3 months later, on my 13th birthday, Thomas and Sarah Miller asked if I would like them to adopt me. By then, I had begun to believe in the permanence of their care, the consistency of their love. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. The adoption was finalized shortly before my 15th birthday. As part of the process, I requested a legal name change from Jennifer Taylor to Megan Miller, a new name for my new life. "You'll always be whoever you want to be in our home," Sarah assured me when I nervously proposed the change. "We just feel lucky to be part of your journey." Art became my salvation during those transformative years. Thomas recognized my talent early and nurtured it with supplies, books, and gentle guidance. The sketchbooks I filled became a visual diary of my healing process, starting with dark, fragmented images that gradually gave way to color, form, and eventually, hope. High school brought new challenges and opportunities. Making friends wasn't easy. Trust issues don't disappear overnight. But slowly, I built connections with a small group of fellow art students who accepted my quiet nature and occasional anxiety attacks without judgment. College applications loomed. With Thomas and Sarah's encouragement, I set my sights on the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Ambitious, but not impossible. "Wherever you want to go, we'll help you get there," Thomas promised. The acceptance letter arrived on a snowy March afternoon during my senior year. Sarah cried tears of joy. Thomas insisted on framing the letter. I allowed myself to truly believe that the future could be something bright and beautiful of my own making. Before leaving for college, I made a decision that had been forming for years. I would completely cut ties with my birth family. No contact, no updates, no connections to the people who had so callously discarded me. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked gently. "You might feel differently someday." "I'm sure," I replied. "The Taylors are my past. You're my family now." And with that resolution firmly in place, I stepped forward into my future. College at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago opened up a world I'd only dreamed about. The campus buzzed with creative energy, students with bright hair and unconventional clothes, professors who spoke about art like it could change the world. Everywhere, there was the freedom to experiment and grow. My first semester was overwhelming but exhilarating. I declared a major in graphic design, discovering a passion for combining visual art with practical communication. Each successful project built confidence that had been systematically dismantled throughout my childhood. Thomas and Sarah supported me from afar, sending care packages during finals, and respecting my need for independence while ensuring I knew their home remained my sanctuary whenever I needed it. The balance they struck showed me what healthy parent-child relationships could look like, even as I entered adulthood. Sophomore year brought Audrey into my life. We met in a color theory class where her bold experiments with neon pigments contrasted with my more restrained palette. Somehow, this difference drew us together rather than apart. "You're the most careful artist I've ever met," she observed over coffee one day. "Every mark you make is deliberate." "Is that bad?" I asked defensively. "Not bad," she clarified. "Just interesting. Makes me wonder what happens when you let go." Audrey's friendship challenged me in ways I desperately needed. She pushed me creatively but respected my boundaries personally. When I finally shared snippets of my past with her, she listened without pity or horror, then simply said, "They really screwed up losing someone like you." It was Audrey who convinced me to try dating during junior year, after I'd spent college avoiding anything beyond casual friendships. You don't have to trust everyone, she reasoned, but maybe try trusting someone. Brian was a photography major with kind eyes and patient hands. Our first date, coffee at a tiny cafe near campus, stretched into a 5-hour conversation. He talked about growing up in rural Wisconsin, his parents' dairy farm, his 3 younger sisters. I shared carefully edited versions of my own background, testing his reactions. My birth parents weren't good people, I explained vaguely. I was adopted as a teenager. Family is complicated, he replied simply. I'm more interested in who you are now than where you came from. Our relationship developed slowly. Brian never pushed for more intimacy, emotional or physical, than I was ready to give. The first time he reached for my hand and I flinched away, he simply nodded and continued our conversation as if nothing had happened. The next time, I was ready. Dr. Reynolds had prepared me for the challenges of adult relationships after childhood trauma. Trust issues don't just affect romantic partnerships, she'd explained. They color every human connection. The key is awareness. Recognizing when your reactions stem from past wounds rather than present realities. This awareness helped when Brian and I hit our first serious conflict 8 months into dating. A miscommunication about plans led to me waiting alone at a restaurant for over an hour. By the time he arrived, profusely apologetic about his dead phone battery, I was locked in a bathroom stall, hyperventilating. You left me, I accused later, the words carrying the weight of abandonment far beyond a delayed dinner. Brian listened as I explained, really explained, what had happened at the train station all those years ago. When I finished, he didn't offer empty platitudes or awkward sympathy. I can't promise I'll never disappoint you, he said finally. But I can promise I'll never deliberately hurt you, and I'll always come back. It wasn't enough to heal all wounds, but it was honest. Our relationship continued, stronger for the vulnerability we'd shared. Graduation approached with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The protective bubble of academia was ending. The real world awaited. Thanks to a professor's recommendation, I secured an interview at Element Design, a mid-sized firm specializing in branding for nonprofits and sustainable businesses. We like your portfolio, the creative director told me after reviewing my work. But more importantly, we like your approach. There's a thoughtfulness in your designs that can't be taught. I started at Element 2 weeks after graduation, renting a tiny studio apartment 20 minutes from the office. The space was all mine, the first time I'd lived completely alone. I painted the walls soft blue, hung my own artwork alongside prints from artists I admired, and bought plants that required daily care, a small exercise in nurturing life. Work challenged me in unexpected ways. The technical aspects came naturally, but collaborating with clients, presenting concepts, and defending creative choices pushed me far outside my comfort zone. My supervisor, Nadia, seemed to intuitively understand when to push and when to support. Your work speaks for itself, she advised after I stumbled through an early presentation. Trust that, and the confidence will follow. She was right. Each small success built upon the last, and within 2 years, I was leading projects for major clients. The scared girl from the train station seemed increasingly distant, though therapy continued to help me integrate these different versions of myself. At 27, Brian proposed during a weekend visit to Sarah and Thomas's home. He'd asked their blessing first, not out of old-fashioned protocol, but recognizing their centrality in my life. We married in a small ceremony the following spring, with Audrey as my maid of honor and Thomas walking me down the aisle. You've built something beautiful, Sarah whispered during our mother-daughter dance, a tradition we'd both insisted on maintaining despite our non-traditional relationship. We built it together, I corrected, embracing the woman who had shown me what motherhood should be. Around this time, my birth parents made their first attempt to contact me. A Facebook message from Karen appeared one ordinary Tuesday. Jennifer, we've been thinking about you. Would love to reconnect. Dad and I are still in Ridgeview. I stared at the message for hours before showing it to Brian, then Dr. Reynolds. With their support, I made the decision to maintain the boundaries I'd established years before. I blocked the account without responding, then did the same when similar messages appeared on Instagram and LinkedIn in the following months. The intrusions disturbed me, but I refused to let them derail the life I'd worked so hard to build. Instead, I channeled the complicated emotions into a new venture. In 2008, I left Element Design to start my own studio, focusing on branding for organizations supporting children and families in crisis. Miller Creative became my professional identity, a name that represented not just my work, but the family who had saved me. From a spare bedroom in our apartment, the business grew steadily through referrals and a growing portfolio of successful projects. Brian supported my entrepreneurial leap completely, his own career as a commercial photographer providing stability during the uncertain early months. We discussed children, but agreed to revisit the question after the business was established. The thought of parenthood still triggered complex emotions, fears of inadvertently reproducing patterns despite my best intentions. "You're not them," Dr. Reynolds reminded me during a particularly difficult session, addressing these fears. The very fact that you're concerned about this shows how different you are. Our apartment eventually gave way to a small house with enough space for separate home offices and a guest room for visiting family. The day we moved in, Brian surprised me with a rescue dog, a gentle one-eyed mutt named Scout, who had his own history of abandonment. "Thought you two might understand each other," Brian explained as Scout cautiously explored his new home. He was right. Scout and I bonded immediately, his unquestioning affection helping heal parts of me that still harbored doubt. My morning routine expanded to include walks through the neighborhood park, watching Scout's joy at simply being alive and safe. With each passing year, the life I'd built felt increasingly solid. My business thrived, my marriage deepened, and my relationship with Thomas and Sarah evolved into the adult parent-child dynamic I'd never expected to experience. My chosen family expanded to include Brian's parents and sisters, who welcomed me without reservation or judgment. I had created a stable, healthy existence despite, or perhaps because of, the trauma that had shaped me. The memories remained, but their power diminished with each conscious choice to live differently than I had been raised. Until this morning, when my phone lit up with 29 missed calls and the carefully constructed walls between past and present began to crumble. I stared at my phone in disbelief. 29 missed calls from an unknown number with a Pennsylvania area code. The notification glared at me, a digital intrusion from a past I'd worked so hard to leave behind. My finger hovered over the voicemail icon, my heart pounding. Scout sensed my distress, pressing his warm body against my legs. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating the ordinary breakfast scene: coffee mug, half-eaten toast, laptop open to client emails, now transformed by this unexpected connection to my former life. I pressed play, holding my breath. "Jennifer or Megan?" "I guess it's Megan now." A male voice, older but instantly recognizable. "Ethan, it's your brother. I know it's been years, and you probably don't want to hear from any of us, but Dad had a heart attack last night. It's bad. The doctors aren't sure if he'll make it. I thought you should know. My number is..." I disconnected before the message finished, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the phone. Scout whined, nudging my palm with his nose. "I'm okay," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I'm okay." But I wasn't. My carefully constructed compartmentalization was crumbling. Within minutes, other notifications appeared. An email from an address I didn't recognize, but with the subject line, "Your father, please read." A Facebook message request that simply read, "Jennifer, it's Mom. Please call. It's urgent." 20 years of silence, and now this barrage of communication. Why no? What did they want from me? The panic attack hit without warning. My chest tightened, breathing became shallow, and the kitchen walls seemed to close in. I hadn't experienced one this severe in years. Fumbling for my phone, I called Dr. Reynolds' office, grateful when she agreed to see me within the hour. "Your reaction is completely normal," she assured me as I sat in her familiar office, clutching a tissue. "This is a significant trigger connecting to your core trauma." I don't understand why I'm so affected, I admitted. I made peace with cutting them off years ago. Did you? She asked gently. Or did you build a life around the absence of that peace? The question hit harder than I expected. Had I truly processed my childhood, or just successfully avoided confronting its deepest wounds? What do I do? I asked finally. That depends on what you want, Dr. Reynolds replied. There's no right answer here, Megan. You can maintain the boundaries you've established, which would be entirely valid. Or you can engage on your own terms. What would I possibly need from them? Only you can answer that. Closure, answers, the opportunity to speak your truth, or perhaps confirmation that your decision to leave was the right one. I left the session with more questions than answers, but also with grounding techniques to manage the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm me. Back home, I called the two people who had earned the right to advise me on family matters. Sarah answered on the second ring. Megan, what a lovely surprise. The moment I heard her voice, I broke down again. Through tears, I explained the situation. Oh, sweetheart, she said when I finished. What can we do? Tell me what to do, I pleaded. You know we can't do that, she replied gently. But I can tell you that whatever you decide, Thomas, and I support you completely. Your relationship, or lack thereof, with your birth family doesn't change anything between us. After hanging up, I called Audrey, who offered to come over immediately. Within an hour, she was at my kitchen table, pouring wine despite the early hour. Okay, let's think this through, she said pragmatically. What's the worst that could happen if you respond? They could try to pull me back into their dysfunction, make me feel responsible for them, dismiss everything they did, re-traumatize me. And what's the worst that could happen if you don't respond? I considered this carefully. I might always wonder, maybe regret not having said what I needed to say. So, the question isn't really about them, Audrey observed. It's about what you need. When Brian came home that evening, he found me surrounded by research, printouts about heart attacks, treatment protocols, recovery rates. My graphic designer's mind had created a flowchart of possible responses and their potential consequences. I see you've been busy, he said, kissing the top of my head. I need to understand what's happening medically before I decide anything, I explained. If this is really life or death, or if it's a manipulation, Brian finished when I trailed off. Is that terrible of me to even think that? No, he said firmly. It's self-protective. And smart. We talked late into the night, weighing options and scenarios. Brian, who had never met my birth family, but had witnessed the aftermath of their damage, maintained that I owed them nothing. But this isn't about owing, he acknowledged. It's about what will help you move forward. By morning, I had reached a decision. I would not call or visit immediately, but I would respond to Ethan's message with a text. This is Megan. I got your message about Dad. I need more information before deciding my next steps. How serious is his condition? What exactly do you and Mom expect from me? His reply came within minutes. Thank you for responding. It was a major heart attack. He's stable but critical. Triple bypass scheduled tomorrow. Mom's a mess. We don't expect anything. Would understand completely if you want no part of this. The sincerity surprised me. I wrote back, I need time to think. We'll be in touch. Over the next 3 days, I engaged in intense self-reflection, spoke with Dr. Reynolds again, and ultimately made my decision. I would meet with Ethan, and only Ethan, at a neutral location to get a clearer picture of the situation before considering any contact with my parents. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our locations. Seeing my brother after 20 years was surreal. The teenager I remembered was now a middle-aged man with thinning hair and glasses, dressed in a rumpled button-down shirt and khakis. Megan, he said, standing awkwardly as I approached his table. Thank you for coming. I nodded, not quite ready for pleasantries. You look great, he offered. Really great. Tell me about Dad, I said, getting straight to the point. Ethan sighed, seeming relieved to focus on facts rather than emotions. Triple bypass was successful, but there were complications. He's still in ICU. The doctors are cautiously optimistic, but at 68 with his history. What history? High blood pressure, high cholesterol, still drinks too much, Ethan explained. He retired 5 years ago when his heart problems started. Sold the hardware store. I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the larger-than-life figure from my childhood with this aging, failing man. And Mom? Falling apart. Basically. They've been married 45 years. For better or worse, they're completely dependent on each other. Are you close to them? I asked, genuinely curious about the life that had continued in my absence. Ethan hesitated. Yes and no. I live about an hour away. See them monthly. Nancy, my wife, isn't their biggest fan, so we keep some distance. Why not? Another hesitation. After you left, things changed. Or maybe I just started seeing more clearly. They never really took responsibility for what happened with you. There were a lot of stories they told, to themselves, to family, to everyone. But over time, especially after having my own kids, I couldn't keep pretending. What did they tell people about me? I asked, both dreading and needing to know. At first, that you were staying with friends in Chicago for school opportunities. Later, that you'd become rebellious and cut contact despite their best efforts. Most people believed them. They were good at presenting themselves as victims. The familiar anger rose in my chest. And you let them? Yes, he admitted quietly. For years, I did. I was 18, heading to college. It was easier to accept their version than confront what really happened. I'm not proud of that. His honesty disarmed me slightly. Why are you reaching out now, after all this time? Just because Dad is sick. Partly, Ethan acknowledged. But also because my daughter, Emma, is 12 now. The age you were when it happened. Watching her grow up has made everything so much clearer. The thought of anyone doing to her what they did to you. He shook his head, unable to finish. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Ethan filled in the 20-year gap, telling me about his life as an accountant, his wife Nancy, their 2 children. He answered my questions about our parents with painful honesty, neither defending their actions nor exaggerating their faults. Have they ever expressed genuine remorse? I asked finally. Not regret that I left, but actual understanding of what they did wrong? In moments, Ethan replied. Dad has said things when drinking that he went too far, that he wishes things had been different. Mom still struggles more with taking responsibility. But they've both asked about you over the years. They keep a photo of you, your high school photo from before, on their mantle. The image disturbed me, my younger self, preserved in their home like a memorial, while the person I'd become remained unknown to them. Would you consider visiting Dad in the hospital? Ethan asked eventually. You wouldn't have to talk to him if he's awake, and I can make sure Mom isn't there if you prefer. I considered the request carefully. I need to think about it. Of course, he nodded. And Megan, whatever you decide is okay. You don't owe any of us anything. As we parted, Ethan hesitantly offered his hand. I took it briefly, this physical connection to my past, both strange and significant. That night, I discussed everything with Brian, who supported my inclination to see my father while maintaining strict boundaries. Just remember, he cautioned, you're not that powerless 12-year-old anymore. You're visiting on your terms. You can leave anytime. The next morning, I called Dr. Reynolds and asked if she would accompany me to the hospital, not as my therapist specifically, but as a support person who understood the complexity of the situation. She agreed immediately. This is an opportunity to engage with your past from a position of strength, she observed. But only if that's what you truly want. I thought about the scared girl at Union Station, the years of healing, the life I'd built, and the parents who had chosen to abandon me. Then I thought about the man in the hospital bed, facing his own mortality. Yes, I said finally. I think I need to do this. Not for them, but for me. The hospital corridor seemed endless as Dr. Reynolds and I walked toward the cardiac ICU. Each step required conscious effort, my body seemingly trying to protect me by refusing to move forward. The antiseptic smell, the hushed voices, the occasional urgent beeping, everything heightened my already overwhelming anxiety. We can take a break, Dr. Reynolds offered, noticing my shallow breathing. I shook my head. If I stop, I might not start again. Ethan waited at the ICU entrance, relief visible on his face when he saw us. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. Dad's awake, but tired from physical therapy. Mom's at the cafeteria. I made sure to schedule this when she'd be away as you requested. And she agreed to that? I asked skeptically. Not exactly, Ethan admitted. I told her I needed time alone with Dad to discuss insurance matters. His discomfort with the deception was obvious. I introduced Dr. Reynolds simply as a friend, and Ethan didn't question her presence. As we approached my father's room, he touched my arm lightly. Just so you're prepared, he looks different. Older, obviously, and the surgery. I nodded, bracing myself. Nothing could have fully prepared me for the sight of Frank Taylor. Once so imposing in my childhood memories, now diminished in a hospital bed, surrounded by monitoring equipment. Tubes and wires connected to his pale body, a nasal cannula delivering oxygen. His chest covered by a hospital gown, but clearly bandaged beneath. His eyes were closed when we entered, but they fluttered open at the sound of footsteps. For a moment, there was no recognition in his gaze as he looked at me. Then his eyes widened, lips parting in shock. "Jennifer," he whispered, voice raspy. "It's Megan now," I corrected automatically. "Megan," he repeated, as if testing the unfamiliar name. "You came?" I remained near the doorway, unable to approach closer. "Yes." The silence stretched between us. 20 years of absence compressed into the small space of his hospital room. What does one say to a parent who abandoned you? To a daughter who never came back? "You look like your mother," he finally said. "I look like Sarah Miller," I replied firmly. "My adoptive mother." His face tightened briefly, then relaxed into resignation. "Of course. I deserve that." Dr. Reynolds stood slightly behind me, her presence grounding. Ethan hovered awkwardly near his father's bed, clearly uncertain of his role in this reunion. "Why did you want to see me?" I asked directly, needing to establish control of the conversation. Frank seemed taken aback by the question. "You're my daughter." "I was your daughter," I corrected, "until you decided a 12-year-old needed to find her own way home from Chicago." He flinched visibly. "We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pick someone up. A mistake is being late. What you and Mom did was deliberate cruelty disguised as parenting." My voice remained steady, surprising me with its strength. Years of therapy had prepared me for this moment, though I'd never expected it to come. "You're right," Frank said quietly. "There's no excuse. I've had a lot of time to think, especially since." He gestured weakly at the medical equipment surrounding him. "When you're facing the end, you see things differently." "Are you dying?" I asked bluntly. "Not immediately, they tell me." But this was a warning shot. He attempted a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Makes a man reflect on his regrets. And I'm a regret. What we did to you is my biggest regret," he clarified. "Not you. Never you." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard from either parent, but it felt insufficient against the magnitude of their actions and the years of trauma that followed. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the door. Karen Taylor stood frozen in the entrance, coffee cup in hand, staring at me as if seeing a ghost. "Jennifer," she breathed. "It's Megan," Ethan corrected quickly. I turned to face the woman who had given birth to me, then laughingly abandoned me. At 65, she was still carefully put together, colored hair, applied makeup, tailored clothes despite the hospital setting. Only her eyes betrayed her age and the stress of her husband's condition. "I told you I'd arrange a different time," Ethan said apologetically to me. "It's fine," I replied, though it wasn't. Having both parents present at once hadn't been part of my carefully constructed plan. Karen moved toward me as if to embrace me, but stopped when I instinctively stepped back. Her hands fluttered awkwardly before dropping to her sides. "You're so beautiful," she said, eyes filling with tears. "All grown up." I remained silent, unprepared for this additional confrontation. "I've thought about you every day," she continued. "Wondered where you were, if you were happy. If you ever thought about us, Karen," Frank warned weakly from his bed. "Give her space." The irony of Frank Taylor advocating for boundaries was not lost on me. "I need some air," I announced abruptly, turning toward the door. Dr. Reynolds immediately moved to accompany me. "Please don't leave," Karen called after me. "Please, we've missed you so much." I paused in the doorway, turning back to face both my birth parents. "You missed me." I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. You abandoned me in a strange city when I was 12 years old. You drove away laughing while I watched. You surrendered your parental rights rather than admit what you did was wrong. And now, 20 years later, you want to talk about missing me. The words poured out, years of unexpressed anger finally finding voice. Karen flinched as if physically struck. We were terrible parents, she admitted, tears now flowing freely. We didn't know how to love you properly. That's not an excuse, I replied. Millions of people figure out how to parent without abandoning their children. You're right, Frank interjected from his bed. There is no excuse. We failed you completely. The simple acknowledgement, devoid of justification, momentarily disarmed me. This was what I had needed to hear 20 years ago. Not explanations or defenses, but simple accountability. I didn't come here for apologies, I said finally. I came to see for myself that the people who had such power over me are just that. People. Flawed, aging, ordinary people who made unforgivable choices. Is there any chance? Karen began. No, I interrupted. There's no chance of reconciliation if that's what you're asking. That opportunity ended the moment you drove away from Union Station. My gaze locked with Frank's in his hospital bed. What I can offer is closure for all of us. I hope you recover fully from your surgery. I don't wish either of you ill. But I need you to understand that I am not Jennifer Taylor anymore. I haven't been for 20 years. I'm Megan Miller. I have wonderful adoptive parents, a loving husband, a successful career, and a life built far away from the damage you caused. My voice remained steady as I continued. I don't hate you anymore. That's taken years of work. But I don't forgive you either, and I don't want you in my life. Any contact should go through Ethan first, and I reserve the right to ignore it completely. The finality of my statement hung in the air. Karen sobbed quietly while Frank closed his eyes, a single tear tracking down his weathered cheek. We understand, he said finally. Dr. Reynolds and I left shortly after, the confrontation having exhausted me emotionally. In the hospital parking lot, I stopped and took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling lighter than I had in years. You did beautifully, Dr. Reynolds observed. How are you feeling? Like I finally got to be the adult in the room with them, I replied. Like I took back some of the power they had over me for so long. Over the next few days, I processed the hospital encounter through additional therapy sessions and long conversations with Brian, Sarah, and Thomas. The experience had been draining, but ultimately empowering. I had faced my abusers on my terms and walked away intact. Ethan texted updates about our father's recovery, which I appreciated, but didn't feel compelled to act upon. I made it clear that while I was open to maintaining minimal contact with my brother, my boundaries regarding our parents remained firm. 1 week after the hospital visit, I sat at my desk, deleting the numerous contact attempts from my birth parents that had accumulated since our meeting. Karen had sent daily emails despite my clear statement about boundaries. Frank had tried calling twice. I blocked their numbers and email addresses without reading the messages, then called Sarah. I just wanted to say thank you, I told her when she answered, for everything. For showing me what parents should be. Oh, sweetheart, she replied warmly. You've given us far more than we could ever give you. That evening, Brian and I took Scout for a long walk through our neighborhood. The summer air was warm, fireflies beginning to appear in the gathering dusk. Scout trotted happily ahead, his one good eye bright with canine contentment. What are you thinking about? Brian asked, squeezing my hand. How sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have, I replied. And how grateful I am that I found mine. The path forward wouldn't always be smooth. Trauma leaves lasting imprints, and healing isn't linear. But for perhaps the first time, I felt truly free of the shadow my birth parents had cast over my life. I had confronted them not as the frightened child they had abandoned, but as the strong, successful woman I had become despite them. The 12-year-old girl left alone at Union Station had found her way home after all. Not to the place she had come from, but to the life and family she had chosen for herself. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who hurt you? What helped you heal from childhood trauma? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength on your own healing journey.